It wasn't a big deal, but it was just, it made it so I couldn't go to the Y and take a shower. And so I was just like, badly needed and really wanted to feel good, you know. But I made it on time, so that's all that really matters. So I apologize for my uncleanly.
We will get along just fine.
We'll survive.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Where'd they go?
Lady that comes by and shakes hands, keeps going.
The lady who always has her hand out.
Your microphone's ready.
Oh yeah, thank you.
I never use this light. Would it help? I don't know. It's so dinky.
Sorry.
Good morning. I'll call the regular meeting of the Cook County Board of Commissioners to order, where our mission is supporting community through quality public service. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? Okay, being none, then I will.
Has that ever happened?
I don't think so. Moving along then, make a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
At this time, we have public comment. Anyone who would like to step forward and up to our table there and have a comment?
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Mary Somnus. I'm the director of the EDA. And first, I'll just speak as an individual, a taxpayer, a resident of the county. Thank you to all of you for the work that you do. It's hard work, but it's good work. It's necessary work, and we're very fortunate that good folks such as yourselves agree to sit at that table. So thank you for your service. And now, as the EDA director, I just have one really quick item. I want you all to know that I am in the very early stages of planning a Cook County Summit on housing. And I, just because I'm aware of a lot of good work that's going on all around the county, a lot of people are looking at our needs and coming up with creative solutions and ideas and making little pokes at the problem that we have. So I'm going to bring everyone together to sit around the table for a couple of hours. I don't know when this is going to happen, sometime in the next couple of months, but I want to make sure that we include everyone from Grand Portage down to the county line and make sure that we're all talking to each other and finding the best possible ways that we can work together and find, I don't want to say cheaper, better, faster, but certainly make more progress towards our end goal of housing. I'm proud of the work that we've done so far, and I'm proud of the others that are out there working on it individually, and I think there's a lot to be gained by having a conversation and creating some synergies. So stay tuned for more about that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Very good. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Mary's Bobsy twin.
Mr. Mary?
Yeah, I'm Mr. Mary, right? Madam Chair, Commissioners, I always write things out. I note on your agenda today that you will set an April date for a public hearing on the proposed ordinance regulating short-term vacation rentals. That reminded me that I have neglected to come pay my respect for the careful, creative work the county did on a related issue, which is moving many vacation rentals from the seasonal rec property tax classification to residential non-homestead. Assessor Todd Smith and his staff and the county board deserve a lot of praise for that result. It was clear that many of the housing units being rented short-term in the vacation market did not belong in the seasonal rec classification, but they were there, and a great many good faith investment decisions had been made based on that classification. It had been what you might call monetized. So I was concerned with how the reclassification effort would turn out. While not seasonal rec, the properties also were clearly not fully commercial either. Moving them to the commercial classification would have destroyed the seasonal rec or vacation rental market in Cook County. It clearly would have done that. I was also not convinced that small Cook County was the place to pioneer a change in property tax policy that very likely will be adopted statewide over time. While we had the highest percentage of housing in the seasonal rec classification in the state, in absolute numbers we're a very small player. Our roughly 3,500 seasonal rec units are dwarfed by Crow Wing's 13,500, for example. So I thought perhaps this was a policy change which should be made at the legislature or the Department of Revenue in St. Paul. But neither of those statewide bodies had any interest in taking this on, even though it was ripe. So Todd Smith and his staff did, and they crafted a creative solution that raised taxes on short-term vacation rentals to a reasonable level while also relieving them of the state general tax. State general tax is a general abomination. The result was an improvement in tax fairness for everyone and also a boost to the Cook County Treasury of about $300,000 a year. I believe it was a very good outcome for which the county and especially the assessor's office deserve a great deal of praise. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you for this time, and certainly want to reiterate the comments of Mr. Boyd and Mary Somnus about what you do in your service. It's much appreciated. Thank you. My name is Mike Larson. I am co-owner of Cascade Vacation Rentals here in Cook County. Currently serve as president of the Lutz and Tofte Tourism Association. Sit on the board of directors of Visit Cook County, and like so many other people in Cook County, I also report to Mary Somnus. She's one of my bosses as I sit on the management team and board of directors for Superior National Golf Course. On your agenda today, under item 5, Land Services Part B, is the request to initiate the public hearing process for the final draft of the vacation rental ordinance, setting the public hearing date for 6 p.m. Wednesday, April 10th, 2019. I'm here before you to request postponement of that request until such time as the Vacation Rental Committee can reconvene to review the draft ordinance. And let me explain. On August 18th, 2015, the Board of Commissioners authorized the formation of a Vacation Rental Committee, and in October of 2015, appointed about 14 people to serve as members and or alternates of that committee. Planning Commissioners Heidi DeKirk with alternate Jan Severson, Planning Commission Dave Seaton, County Administrator Mr. Jeff Caldwell, County Attorney Ms. Molly Hicken, County Auditor Brady Powers, County Land Services Mr. Tim Nelson, Mitch Everson, Private Business Mike Larson, Resorts Bruce Martinson, Real Estate Kim Wolf, General Public J.D. Lair, City of Grand Marais, Tim Kennedy, and other county staff participants. I'm sure some of you are aware of all that. Over the next several years, we gathered, and on February 9th, 2018, Mr. Nelson prepared and presented the Cook County Vacation Committee report with the subtitle titled Activities and Determinations of the Vacational Rental Committee from August 2015 to January 2018. In his conclusion, he wrote, the Cook County Vacation Rental Committee determined that they would not recommend taking any specific action at this time other than to urge the county to continue to seek out any new vacation rental operation and provide an educational letter informing each operation of their obligation to lodging taxes and potential license requirements through the Minnesota Department of Health. The auditor's office staff at that time indicated they would take on that role. The committee met again in January 2018, and the committee reaffirmed its position and it adjourned. As a member of the Vacation Rental Committee, I was surprised to learn, like on Friday, that a draft ordinance had been prepared and the process in play to move in creating a new vacation rental ordinance combined with a county vacation rental license. Please let it be known that my business partner, Steve Serbaugh, and myself do not necessarily oppose the proposed ordinance, nor the county issued license. We talked about that at the committee level. That is nothing new. I have read Mr. Nelson's report as summarized in your packet, and Mr. Nelson, like usual, does a very nice job in articulating the summary background, the purpose, and the recommendation as set forth. However, you asked this committee to volunteer their personal time to help guide the county in examining best practices for vacation rental industry here in Cook County. To learn just late last week of this proposed ordinance and having this move to a public hearing process quite obviously caught me by surprise, and I'm sure it did with all other vacation rental members, as there was no advance notice or email sent acknowledging that this was to take place. I believe this is disrespectful to the process and disrespectful to the countless number of hours we have provided to help you, the county, address this very important issue. The overall process feels circumvented. I'm confident that was not intentional, but it happened. With that being said, I'd like to recommend to the Board of Commissioners this morning that no action be taken today, that Mr. Nelson call the Vacation Rental Committee back together to review the draft ordinance. The Vacation Rental Committee may in fact find the ordinance as outlined perfectly in place. Irrespective of suggested changes or not, it's important we get this right, and it's simply the right thing to do based on what you asked us to do dating back to August 18th, 2015. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else for public comment?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Wow, I read pieces in the packet for today, and I thought, lots of numbers, lots of fun. I wanted to start with the Kronos payroll system, and just a couple of comments, really not any questions that I think you can answer here, but as I read through that, I was wondering if all the parts and pieces are in that report for everyone to consider. One of them being the external help that's needed to make this system work, if that's something that is currently happening and budgeted, or if that's more additional dollars to be spent as you hire more to get into the system and bring it up to date and keep it up to date. Are the parts that are currently in place up and running at 100% so that there are some things that are secure and done, like the HR part, or is that still something that's in flux and will be needed to be updated and worked on, as well as the whole rest of this Kronos package? There is an interesting piece talking about equipment, and it says we're going to be adding a piece of equipment called a finger scan. It's like, oh, that sounds really high-tech, like kind of a James Bond thing. I'm not exactly sure what that means for employees, what finger scan, if that's the way we get into a system, or check in the morning, or check out at night. Just more interesting kinds of pieces here. The report on, that shows the dollars and cents, you know, I guess you guys are good at reading all those numbers and making sense out of them, but to anybody else out here in the public, it's Greek. I played with the numbers and tried to come up with something that made some sense to me, and I finally had to give up because it's Greek. So, more power to you. If you understand what this is and what's going to happen and what it's going to cost for you and what it's going to cost for us down the road in the future for this system, my question is, what's wrong with what we have right now? Why can't it be tweaked and made to work as opposed to spending, I'm guessing, $50,000 and more a year for a payroll system? My second piece is regarding the Hovland Public Works. And there I do have some questions. Very specifically, I looked at the justification for the Hovland garage. And on page 64, there's a whole bunch of fund numbers there. And it starts out talking about available funds, and there's, about the third line down, there's something, $25,000 sitting there that's not attached to anything. Okay. There's a little further down the budget, or it reads across, a project, a budget, a bid, and an actual, and then what's left. There are a lot of holes there. Does that mean that things that are like the LEC windows, there is a budget of $27,000, there's nothing in the bid, nothing in the actual, and nothing in the budget left? Does that mean that that's done? It's never going to happen? There's an item called Community Center Warming House. There's a budget of $470,000, a bid of $205,000, an actual of $29,000, leaving $175,000. Does that mean that that building was over budgeted, overbid? It's done? It's not done? How do those numbers relate to where we're going here, which is the bottom line in the bottom right-hand corner? There's an $18,000 figure sitting there in a little gray box. I assume that that's supposed to be some good number for some reason, but what? There's no explanation. There's nothing there that tells me anything except a whole bunch of numbers that somebody's played with and a whole lot of holes. I can add the numbers together and know where you got them, but they don't mean anything because anybody can add numbers and make them work the way you want them to work. What do they mean? I saw the 4 bids, and it's interesting that the bottom on 2 of the bids, the pieces that give you all the alternates that you're supposed to add and deduct are missing. So a lot of good the paper does. It doesn't give you a complete picture, at least for me. And maybe that's what happens when you put things on paper. I'm wondering where the answer is to the questions I raised a couple weeks ago. If I need to come in and talk to Brady personally and ask him the questions in order to get the answer, or if that's something that the board was going to try to respond in some way, shape, or form, where is the community communication coming back to us? I know there's an article in the paper. Again, where is the communication coming back to us for the questions that we ask?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last. Okay.
As you know, I'm Jan Sievertson. I'm happy to be here today. I'm sorry I haven't been here earlier. I feel that the citizens have a responsibility to show up and support the work that's happening here. A lot of good, competent, complicated work happens at this table. And for citizens to show up and say, why don't I understand, is not necessarily the job of the county board. The county board is here to conduct the business of the county, and it is complicated. And unless you've been involved in a large organization for most of your life and understand financial statements, et cetera, I don't, as a private citizen, I can't expect to understand the complexities of government finance. So, yes, I would say that those questions would be better answered one-on-one rather than as a whole board. Your job is more about doing policy, et cetera. And so I just wanted to say that you've accomplished a lot in the last few years. I really want to support the role of a county administrator in this new form of administrative government. This is way too complex of an organization, and the tasks that you need to perform to conduct those things reasonably and competently without an experienced, competent administrator. So thank you, Jeff, for performing that role under extremely adverse conditions these past several years, and I want to support you in going forward, all of you. And I just wanted to say a little bit about listening. I think when I was a board member, I thought that my role was to listen to constituents a lot. And I learned that it really is an important role. But I also learned that I needed to listen with discernment. It wasn't serving me as a board member well to listen to every complaint and issue over and over and over again, particularly if there was a lack of understanding. And those issues resolve themselves much better in a one-on-one situation than in the public comment period of your meeting. But I just wanted to say that I was way better if I listened to really inspiring things, if I went to AMC and went to the workshops and listened to the experience of competent people who work with government on a daily basis. I found that I did better if I listened to good news programs on the radio, if I read a lot of newspapers. So discerning listening was way more important to me than listening to every person's opinion in the community. We are isolated, and that creates a lot of complexities, and it creates a lot of diversity in people's experiences here. And we need that experience and competency of the outside world to perform this role. So I just want to say thank you. You've all done a remarkable job. You put up with a lot of adversity, and you do it patiently, gracefully, and respectfully, and I hope you will continue with that. But I hope you will also remember that everyone's opinion is not necessarily what you need to be listening to. You need to be listening to the inspiring opinions, the competent ones, the educated ones. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll move along then to the consent agenda. Anyone want to pull anything? No? Okay, motion to approve as a whole?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We have a public hearing at 10 o'clock, but it's not 10 o'clock, so we'll move on to the next item since Tim is in the room.
Morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I had to bring my soda with me, or something to drink.
Did you have to pop a cold one before you walked up?
Got to pop a cold one before coming. I imagine we're going to be talking for a little while here. The first item that I do have is actually a fairly quick item, and that is I'm seeking for some kind of just a general authorization to proceed with a series of minor tweaks and changes to the zoning ordinance. Whenever we try, as we're going to experience here later, when we try kind of wholesale changes, a lot gets thrown into it, and we get bogged down. When I first got here, we tried to wholesale change the zoning ordinance, try to update it. After 2 years, we finally just gave up and said this is not going to work because there are so many issues, so many things to discuss, and so what we'd like to see is a little more of a, how do you eat an elephant? You do it one bite at a time. And so if we split it into smaller bites and are able to take and digest it, then it's not such an overwhelming exercise. And so we are stuck with this interesting provision in our zoning ordinance that requires that any initiation for any changes in the zoning ordinance either have to be initiated by the County Board of Commissioners, the Planning Commission, or affected property owners. And so I have to bring it either to the commissioners every single time or the Planning Commission before we can even publish for a public hearing. And it's not required by law, but it's something that we have in the ordinance, and I'm not looking to change that. But in a series like this, where we've gone over, and now that I've had 20 plus years in service to the county, we've seen a lot of things that we can change, and we'd like to just be able to introduce them slowly over time. And I don't want to have to come back to the commissioners and get authorization to even go out on public hearing for each of the items. The Board of Commissioners will have the final say, we'll have the public hearings for each one of the items. It's just a smoother way to be able to progress through the changes. So basically, that's what I'm asking, is general authorization through the rest of this year to go ahead and initiate small changes to the zoning ordinance that will appear before the Planning Commission in public hearing, and then before the Board of Commissioners for final decisions.
Okay, thank you on that. I think we could maybe help you with a couple of things, if that's okay, if we have questions. I did look through the draft on the 14th and the one that you have now, and you've added a couple of things.
This, Madam Chair, this is the first item. This is about just the zoning ordinance changes.
Oh,
this is
zoning,
not
okay.
the vacation
Okay.
rental ordinance.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
We'll take that one next. I wanted to hit
okay.
this one first.
One at a
Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion to authorize Tim Nelson, our Land Services Director, to initiate changes to the zoning ordinance in the 2019 calendar year for housekeeping, just like it says.
I'll support.
Any questions or comments on that, Commissioner Dukirk?
Since we have two ordinance-related things on the agenda, and we have a new commissioner here, and we don't do this very often, and you kind of touched on, sometimes we form committees, sometimes we don't form committees. Sometimes when we form committees, a 6-month process takes 6 years. So just a reminder, when we take bigger chunks or we do ordinances, sometimes we form committees to create, review, rewrite, or update ordinances. And so there was a discussion this morning about the next ordinance that's on there, and that wasn't what we created that committee to do. And we're not creating a committee to do these updates, you're just going to do them in-house?
That is correct.
Okay, one at a time.
Commissioner Dukirk, we've already had a list, and this is basically formulated internally through staff, through interactions with the public and administering the ordinance and seeing what's kind of working, what's not really working, how we can streamline things the most, and actually provide more clarity to certain issues. There are some ambiguous issues where we have to make determinations on, and over the course of the years, we've determined, you know what, it's probably better to have some better clarity in it, so there isn't any kind of arbitrary discussion over things.
So do we have to have a public hearing for every single ordinance update?
Every
Okay,
modification, any amendment to the ordinance requires, by state law, yes, a public hearing.
all right. That's all I got.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we've had a motion.
I guess the only other thing is I appreciate you taking the initiative to ask for this authorization versus us saying, hey, could you look at this, could you look at this, could you look at this, having you do that it's really efficient, and I appreciate that.
We
Thank
still
you.
do that.
Well, and yeah, that means we
Could.
don't take that away from.
Okay, so we've had a motion and a second. I'll ask for a vote. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Same sign. Okay, now that I'm jumping ahead.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. And this one, we'll just go on a little bit of a small journey on here. We seem to have a little bit of a time, and we did, as Commissioner Dukirk mentioned, we did, and Madam Chair, we did have some comments before in public comment with regards to the process. We certainly value Mike's participation in the committee. The description that he gave was slightly incomplete, and I'll get to that discussion in a little bit, but this process actually started many years before 2015. We've been talking about this issue at least for 15 years now at the county level, and I would say that it did take until 2015 to go ahead and establish a committee, but we did have a number of discussions on the commissioner level, at the planning commission level. We talked about it in the land use guide plan discussions that we had, so this has been an ongoing discussion. It was in 2015 where the board finally said, okay, you know what, we're getting enough concerns, and this wasn't initiated internally. This was initiated by the amount of concerns that were expressed to the board, commission members, and such in terms of concerns the public might have. There was also discussion a little bit earlier about the housing and having a housing summit. One of the concerns that had been brought up over the course of the years was whether vacation rentals are taking away from actual long-term rental housing solutions and such like that. That's just part of the mix of the conversation that we've had over the course of the years. So, going back to 2015, we did get the charge from the commissioners to set up this committee. And Mike already kind of described the membership to this. We did have the Board of Commissioners and Planning Commission representatives. We had the industry, including the vacation rental, realty, and resorts. We had several of the county departments on there, including the auditor's office, assessors, environmental health, county attorney, and then we did have a population, kind of an at-large person from the community, and we also even invited the city of Grand Marais to participate in the discussions with us. The committee has met off and on. It wasn't just one steady process. It was kind of a few times we met and then made this kind of the same determination at each time. We kind of looked and really focused on kind of two main brackets of issues, and that included quality of life issues and environmental health that are the septic, noise, traffic, light, that kind of stuff, parking, and then the other aspect of it, main consideration is like leveling the playing field from an industry standpoint in terms of mom and pop resorts and such, looking at performance standards and taxation and everything like that, what kind of level playing field there is for everybody. At each time through the course of the meetings that we had, the conclusion always kind of came to that same determination is, well, at this point, yes, there are concerns out there about what it is, but because of the numbers that we have and the type of resources that we have available, and the fact that we do have existing regulations in place to be able to manage some of these complaints. We do have a septic program. We do have a noise ordinance. We do have trespassing ordinance. We do have these things with which to be able to address some of these issues. The determination had always been, we'll just leave well enough alone. As Mike had mentioned earlier in that report, that we determined, okay, maybe what we'll do is really focus on trying to determine the number of it and leave it up to the auditor's office. Karen at the time had to volunteer to go ahead. She had produced a list, of operations, and then volunteered to go ahead and lead an educational kind of document in terms of what was required with regards to maybe the state license and lodging taxes and other things like that. Where it stopped and where Mike kind of stopped at the beginning of 2018 is not where the process stopped. And actually, that's why I left to go get some of these documents, is we did reconvene again in the summer. And we met several times in the summer into the fall because more concerns have been expressed, and I think it was kind of initiated by maybe some stories in the newspaper about Lutz and the concentration of rentals and things like that. But anyway, we did actually meet subsequent to that in the summer, and I do have the agendas, and I do have what we did in that process is we established a subcommittee. And then we met several times, and here's the report of the subcommittee that's back to the board. Now, actually, the subcommittee met several times and really looked at the issue, and really the committee sent the charge to the subcommittee to, maybe it is time to start taking a look at this issue. We've been kind of kicking the can down the road and seeing what happens. We've looked at our neighbors, Lake County, what are they doing? They have a conditional use requirement permit for every vacation rental operation. Crow Wing County does not. They don't do anything to regulate their vacation rentals from a land use services standpoint. And so we were kind of evaluating, well, what's the difference? What do we do? What don't we do? What's appropriate under our circumstances? What distinguishes us, Cook County, from Lake County is the fact that Lake County has a dramatic, really substantial lower number of vacation rental operations than we do. We have a substantially higher number, more in lines with Crow Wing and such, than we do with Lake. And so they have the ability to go ahead and do the public hearing for each one. If we were to conduct public hearings for each one, and we would, if we were to go to conditional use, interim use, we would choose the interim use permit side of it, and we would have then 250 plus public hearings with regards to vacation rentals. We currently hold 24 or so public hearings a year with regards to the variances and such. So if you look at that add to our increase into the available resources that we have, that would really be overwhelming. So as a subcommittee, it met several times and then came up with a few points, recommendations that it brought back to the full committee. And in the late fall of 2018, this last year, then brought it back to that committee, and the committee then kind of gave, there wasn't a per hand vote, but there was a general consensus, okay, this is the way that we should go. Once we got that kind of general consensus from the committee, then we basically came back internally and worked on the ordinance draft, as you see it too. Yes, it has changed over the course. We've had it reviewed by internal, like the county attorney. We've had it reviewed by the MCIT land use attorney, and they've recommended changes. We've looked at other counties' ordinances. We've talked to the Minnesota Department of Health in terms of their ideas and suggestions, and what you see is just kind of a snapshot of what the ordinance looks like. One of the question comes in is okay, when do we start, when do we stop the committee process? The committee process is very valuable, and we absolutely respect and honor and really value all of the committee members' participation on that. It was a really good process, and as you would expect, like any process in Cook County, you have people on all sides of the issue. I've had people, lifelong members of the community, contact me over this process and say, you guys I don't know how you were even letting these operations continue. They should be banned in all residential zone districts. And then I've had in the same time frame, people contact us and say, you're doing too much, you're overbearing, and you're kind of the vacation rental Nazis. You want to clamp down on everything. So much like everything Cook County, there's all the diversity of opinion and such. Well, as we found in the septic, well, in many ordinances over the course of time, but in the septic is a kind of one of the more recent runs that we had. We had a lot of engagement in our septic committee process, a lot of good, valuable progress towards the development of an ordinance. Once that's done, and you need to understand, when we start a public hearing process. It's not, we have a public hearing. Sometimes when an issue is non-controversial, that's all it can take. It's just one public hearing and you're done. Septic ordinance took several, and that's what it's for, is to bring it out. A committee process is really good and it's valuable, and it hones it down to a document and it gets it set and ready to go. But it is kind of exclusionary. As good as a committee is, it's only a slight representation from even each of those industries. You got the vacation rental industry, we've got some representation, but we don't have all of them. And so what putting it into the public hearing portion of it does is actually brings more transparency into that process. It brings it up so everybody has the opportunity to take a look at all of the provisions. And we even sat in the septic ordinance one public hearing with the Planning Commission, went line by line, and the septic contractors were there and realtors were there, and we kind of went and went over everything. And that's the good thing about the public hearing process, is that it is open to everybody. So, let me get a drink here. This is why I did this. All right, so at this point, I'm just addressing the ordinance portion of it, not even the agreement. We can talk about any kind of agreement later. That's just for informational purposes anyway. Nothing we do today, like I said, is any kind of final decision on anything. So yeah, we did develop that draft ordinance. It does include requirements. What the committee really determined is that now would be appropriate time to probably institute a regulatory oversight program that would not be overburdensome for the vacation rental operations, because it was very clear that vacation rentals are a positive force in the community. They bring jobs, they bring economy. It is a very good thing, and the committee recognizes that. But they don't want an ordinance that's overburdensome for the vacation rental operations or for the county to regulate, but that would effectively track the operations and provide a reliable venue to track and manage complaints that come in right now. Some come to us, maybe some go to the sheriff's office. We don't get a lot of complaints, but occasionally when they do come in, they do. And to ensure equity in the submission of lodging and other taxes that's out there. So that's basically what the ordinance is for. It is a snapshot at this time, and I would fully expect, much like every ordinance or every item, once it hits the public hearing portion of it and public comment, that we would have a Cook County spirited and healthy discussion on it, and what comes out at the end may not be what you see that's before you, and that's the intent of the public hearing process.
Okay. Well, thank you for filling us in on all of that. I guess I have a couple of comments from the draft in February. You, under Article 3.0, you've added 3.5, so that was an improvement you felt in the final draft, under the annual license required?
Well, anything we add during this process, we would kind of figure would either improve it for clarity's sake, or bring it in line with what the state requires, or what might be considered to be best practices.
So that just talks about the licensing expiring. You've added that.
Well, instead of a perpetual license, having it expire?
That's what it says.
Yeah, annual license, basically.
Okay, so you've added that.
We had discussed on the, in the committee, in the subcommittee, whether it should be an annual, a biannual, or a perpetual permit.
So I guess I would have to say, in regards to Mr. Larson's comment, has the full committee seen the final draft?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. So I will recognize comments here.
Madam Chair, I'd like to address your question. The Vacation Rental Committee wasn't created to draft an ordinance. We have created committees in the past to draft ordinances, and then we bring it back to them before the public hearing. So I think there's some confusion there. You also left out, after the public hearing, it does come back to us for approval, and we do have the right to reject it. So this is just a step, a first step. The subcommittee can be at the public hearing and make comment. This is not a huge ordinance, so I think that's part of why we didn't go through the process of creating another subcommittee of the subcommittee to create another ordinance, because it's not as in-depth and detailed as other ordinances that we've written where we have created committees. And like Tim said, sometimes they don't pass on the first time. I think that we need to set the meeting and continue to move ahead, knowing that we might not approve this draft until the middle of this summer. You know, it's the first step, it's the process. We're following the same process we followed for years. We're not out of line, and yes, the committee has done wonderful work and great work, and I appreciate all of it, but the task of that committee was not to write an ordinance.
Got his comments? Commissioner Mills?
I will, but I'm curious. Tim had his hand. You wanted to say something?
Thank you, Commissioner Mills, Madam Chair. Just to dovetail onto that, we have had committees that were specifically set up to develop ordinance language, one of which is the Subdivision Ordinance Committee. Again, really good committee, good people on it. The first crack at it took 6 years to actually achieve it, because to try to achieve consensus on a committee with a variety of opinion was really difficult, and now in this latest run, it's completely stalled out and stopped again. So it is, as Commissioner Dukirk said, that wasn't the original intent of this committee, is to actually draft the ordinance language. And when we have had committees that have been established for that purpose, it makes it really, really difficult for that committee to finish up.
Okay. Yes, Commissioner Mills?
Thank you. And so I'm new, and so I'm curious if you could go through the hearing process a little bit. As far as at the hearing, you'll receive comments. Then what? How are those comments taken in? Who decides how they affect or don't affect the ordinance? How is that process done at that point?
Okay.
In general.
Commissioner Mills, yes. Madam Chair, I'll contrast two processes that we had. Recently, we just made a housekeeping change to the zoning ordinance that basically brought us into line with Minnesota state law with regards to conditional use permits and not reviewing them, or not renewing them, but just simply reviewing them on an annual basis. When we initiate a public hearing process, we post notice for it. So we publish in the newspaper. It basically gets published all over the place. We have copies in the auditor's office and in the regular office, and we post it online for people to see what that language is. Between the time that we post it, there's a state minimum required of 10 days is all that it is, but we post it for longer than that. In that time frame that people see that, they're able to submit comments to it all during that time. And just here's the contrast. In that last exercise where we did that housekeeping change, well, nobody commented on it because there really was of little to no consequence. When it got to the public hearing, the Planning Commission then opens it up for anybody to speak, public hearing-wise, to speak questions, comments, whatever. Again, in the contrast, we opened it up. Nobody was in the audience to be able to ask questions. It didn't rise to that level of consequence. The Planning Commission members then actually spoke amongst themselves, and the question and answer was about what does this affect and everything like that. Well, then at the end of it, the Planning Commission then makes a recommendation. They vote to either recommend approval, denial of it, or rejection, or send it back to the board to say, you know, this needs more work, or whatever the case. So the Planning Commission makes a recommendation that then comes back to the full Board of Commissioners. I would submit the report to you then, and as I did in this last one, they didn't. They just unanimously voted in favor of that modification. Contrast that to, again, back to the septic ordinance. We published it out. We had 130 plus comments come in, email, letters, and everything. Created a whole spreadsheet that listed everybody's comment and what our reaction or response to that comment would be. Printed that out. That was before the public even hearing got there. So we published that. We got in a bunch of public comments from it, and that was completely after the the septic committee process. And then once we had the the planning commission open up the public hearing, we had plenty of people that would come to this chair and speak to their concerns. And in that, which I think was probably the most intensive of the ordinance updates that we did end up going kind of section by section, line by line. And after the public comments were made, the board chair decided at that time, well, let's just go through this and look at the comments, look at the language, and see if we can't get everybody together to an agreeable document. It took a number of meetings, but we got there. And then once we were done with that, then the Planning Commission did vote to recommend approval of it. I have been in circumstances where, and this again goes back to the original subdivision ordinance process, which took 6 years, as we went through the subdivision ordinance committee. The committee recommended it to the board then said, okay, let's go out on public hearing for it, post on public hearing. We have the public hearing process. There's enough concern about the document the way that it was. Then the Planning Commission voted to recommend back to the Board of Commissioners to send it back to the Subdivision Ordinance Committee to rework and do this and such. And it was a cycle that just kept going for 6 years. And so those are the two kind of contrasts. But there is plenty and sufficient time and availability for people to be able to comment, and that's kind of the whole intent. Sometimes the public hearing process doesn't take any time at all, and sometimes it takes several months.
Okay, I have more questions, but I mean, they're not necessarily related. So if there's something,
This one's related.
Okay, please.
We could have the vacation committee meet before April 10th, and their comments would be submitted at the public hearing.
The options that the commissioners have in front of you right now are to, go ahead and post for or initiate the public hearing process, which would set April 10th as the thing, and to direct me to go ahead and have a meeting of the vacation rental committee. That's one, or to post notice of it and not have a meeting, but to say, okay, send it out to all the committee members and get written comments back. Or to not even post for the public hearing and say, you know what, we're just going to table this item and have a vacation rental committee meeting and see where it goes from there.
and that is what I was wondering about, is what are the, it seems to me that going into a public hearing, you might get some comments. That was a joke, sorry. You will get a lot of comments, maybe more than the septic ordinance, I don't know. And you didn't need to laugh if it wasn't funny. It was kind of. I was just thinking, going into public comment or into the hearing, it feels like it's to the process of advantage to go in as strong of an ordinance as possible. Strong being worked out, gone through different details. And I was wondering if there's a disadvantage to going back to the committee at this point. Does that cause problems that I'm not aware of?
Commissioner Mills, Madam Chair, the committees, we have met since 2015. There's a lot of discussion in it, and we kind of know, I'm not the only person that's sitting here that has been on that, and we do have a pretty good feel, and we do know that I personally, in observing this over the last 4+ years, can kind of state that I don't believe we're going to get like a big consensus on this. There are opposing sides to it, and so though we may get some elements, support for some of the elements, we may not get support for others. So this document, if it comes back, it may be weaker or different in a way. I don't know. The way that it is gives kind of all the options that are on the table to it. But it's certainly the purview of the board to be able to make that determination.
Okay. Commissioner Bershheim?
Our decision today is to go ahead with the hearing or not. That's the first decision, correct?
That's correct, Commissioner Bershheim.
And are there any is there any downside or ramifications that would be negative in delaying the hearing? As far as process, how this plays out long-term?
Commissioner Bershon, Madam Chair. No, not in terms of where we're at with regards to, regulating. What we are running into, frankly, if we do postpone it, then what we're running into is our busy time. And if we're implementing a new program, I don't want to, we have sufficient enough time to probably get it in and start it into the busy season now, but if we postpone it, say the meeting into May, then it probably wouldn't serve us well to do it until late fall to start in 20, just because we will be entering the busy season. And so that's the only downside for us, is that, really if we kick the can down the road a month, 2 months or more, then we might as well wait, because we don't have the resources to really pick that up and start the program.
And if it's like the septic ordinance, like Dave said, and it takes 3 to 6 months to approve the draft, then we're looking next year or later.
And that could happen as a result of the hearing.
It could.
So if it's going to happen either way if we delay it.
Madam Chair, if I could.
Yes.
The Planning Commission has been given the responsibility to advance these things, but the board has the authority to activate and authorize some of the components, i.e. setting the date for the public hearing. There's one element of why we're here that we haven't talked about before. Director Nelson talked about protection of environmental concerns. He talked about addressing of nuisance abatements. He's talked about the process of amending the ordinance. We can't change the rules of how what our authority is over people's property without them having an opportunity to participate in that. From a very general overview, that's the process of ordinance amendment. And in the first iterations of the Vacation Rental Committee, we kept coming back to, we don't see a problem with tax compliance. We don't see a problem with this. We don't see a problem with that. And that's why we kept coming back to the answer, Brady responding from his office, we don't have more resources to address a problem that we don't see exist to a significant extent. All of those comments were true. The public comment that kicked us down the road doing this is the perception that people are turning all of the housing stock into short-term rentals and nothing's available for the people who want to live here. It's very subjective. It's a very emotional comment. It's also the comment that got us to the point of thinking there's one more reason why we should have a licensing program, and that's to have good data to either confirm or deny the claims that those trends are significantly skyrocketing. The primary objection to doing any regulation was the fact that it would just be an additional cost we'd have to absorb and pass on to taxpayers. The licensing fee is the way that we get this additional data so that we do have better assurances of compliance with environmental standards, with nuisance issues, with taxation issues, and we don't pass it on to the taxpayers directly. I mean, we pass it on to somebody. Somebody's going to pay it. But that was the third element that came in, and Tim can probably share his exasperation with how many times I changed sides onto whether or not the subcommittee was going to recommend whether we proceed with something or not. We've had really good conversation at the large committee level, and yet at some point, as county staff, you're charging us with and trusting us with bringing you recommendations on how we think we ought to address the needs in our community. And at this point, I think we've done that. We certainly value the input from the general committee, but from a very strict standpoint, we haven't designated that committee any authority that currently resides with the Planning Commission or the board, which means that what we really should do is, if we're this far into the system, is we should let the authorities that are named take this process and facilitate the public process related to that. If we say, no, let's kick it back to the committee one more time, we're kind of almost going around the authority that the Planning Commission has to review this.
And as a planning commission member over the last 6 years, they get extremely frustrated when the county board goes around the process and the system. I'm the biggest one with feelings here, and I want everyone to feel good, and I want everyone to be involved, and everyone to be happy. But that just gets me and the rest of the board into trouble. I'll admit it, because we have processes for a reason. And I spent an hour ruining Tim's Monday morning yesterday with my feelings and saying, what about the vacation rental committee? And what about this? And what about that? And what if we delay it? And why don't we have the public hearing? And being reminded about our process and being reminded that the public hearing is the opportunity for input. That is the best opportunity for input, and that's why we do it. And delaying it delays the community's opportunity to put input into it. Making it go out until May or June takes away the community's right to have input on this process. And so I don't want the community to be delayed any longer. I want the community to come in now and work with us on the draft.
And one other point related to how the draft would change or could change through this process, and there's a couple of different ways. If the Planning Commission hears overwhelming something with this policy is not necessarily the direction we want to go, and we want to go this way, they could make that recommendation. Otherwise, staff could bring refinements based on understanding of state law or our responsibilities, and those could also be brought in. The elements related to naming an annual license, but not having an element in there about naming the period is an oversight. So naming the period that licenses expire at the end of the year and the application process is this period is just a refinement on the rule so that it's more enforceable. So the policymaking committee is, and eventually, ultimately, this board is the one that's going to approve on that recommendation. But the policy review responsibility at this point lies with the Planning Commission.
Yeah, process questions and comments, I guess. I would like to just commend the work in reading this ordinance. I think it's well done. I don't have any problem with that. But we have a lot of information about how to implement it and, you know, the fees and so forth. And that was part of our discussion at our last meeting. You know, we'll be an outside agency dealing with this. As a commissioner, I have some thoughts because part of my campaigning was going around and talking to people in neighborhoods where, you know, there was a lot of vacation rentals. And so I think I've got some, you know, input from the constituents that, you know, that I would like to at least address in this process at some point. So I'll ask a question and then I'll comment on where I think I'm at least in process, or do I understand it correctly? So we're going to have a hearing, and after that hearing, more than likely will either some process will take place to take all that information and then it'll come back to the board at some point. And within that time period, you could have a meeting with the committee so that they may have some input or not, I don't know, and I guess that would be your decision. Then something would come back to us on ordinance, and then it would be up to the board to adopt that ordinance. Now, the devil in the details is where I'm going. You know, there's a lot of kinds of decisions that can be made on how to implement this. And I think that's where our biggest challenge is going to be, at least for me, because, you know, from what I've heard from constituents. So then, my question is, for process clarification, is that we then as a board would make some decisions in regard to how this would be implemented?
Commissioner Bergeron.
And then, from my background where I've worked, is that you have, you know, you implement something, whether it is, and then you adopt a procedural implementation document, and then, is that where we'd go with this?
Commissioner Bersheim, Madam Chair. And that's why this is two separate kind of items in agreement, discussion on the agreement and discussion on the ordinance, but they're interconnected, and you're absolutely right, Commissioner Bersheim, in terms of, yes, you need an ordinance, but you need a method in which to implement that ordinance. Over the course of the years, there's been a lot of talk in terms of the numbers of operations that we have in the county, and it depends on how you define them as to how extensive that list is. There's a list that was generated by the auditor's office. Karen Blackburn back in the day had created a list. I know Mike back there did his own research and did a list. Back in 2015, 16, they got together and kind of looked at that list to see if it included everything. So we had that list to begin with. Well, Minnesota Department of Health has a list, and the assessor's office recently did a list, very extensive study on it, and have a list. And then one of the companies that we'd spoken to, this Host Compliance, they generated their own list based off of all the listings on all the VRBO sites. One thing that is important to note is none of those lists identify the exact same number. So there is a method that we have to refine in terms of how we define these things and what list is used, and whatever we use, we have to basically reconcile with the Minnesota Department of Health and such and get that listed. Okay, kind of the general ballpark number is about 250 plus. It's in excess of 250 operations. To process that number of permits and such, we do about 170 land use permits in a year. We have a full-time staff member that's doing that. So if we're doing 250 licenses and reviewing and handling those things, that's going to be a staff addition. The reason why we're even looking at outside assistance is because it's basically a third of the cost to the county. So we have to balance basically the amount of services, the level of services that we're providing and giving to the community, and what the cost of that service is going to be. It's good to have some, that local connection, but it's good, especially in all the discussions with the budget impacts and revenues and such like that. Nothing that this office does, regrettably, is any kind of money maker. We're always, because of, and businesses would understand this, economies of scale. We just don't have the numbers up here to be able to have permit programs or less that'll sustain themselves unless we get creative with the way in which to be able to manage, implement, and administer those over the course of time. So that's one reason we've explored internally, and we've also looked at other types of services. That's another bit of the discussion, and that's why I'd even put that on there, is for a potential discussion, is that this potential agreement with a compliance monitoring service that we've spoken to from time to time.
So to follow that up, so getting back to my original question, the county board, we as commissioners would finalize some kind of procedural kind of process in which this would be implemented after the ordinance has been approved.
Yes, Commissioner Bersheim, Madam Chair. With regards to, especially as much attention is being paid to this, but in any case, if no attention was being paid to this, no final decision would be made in terms of how this program would be implemented and what would it be included or not included in the ordinance. No final, you're the final decision-making body. So before you make that decision, you have to be very well aware, and it's my job to make sure that you're very well informed. And in terms of that process between the public hearing process and coming to the Board of Commissioners, yeah, if it takes more than one public hearing with the Planning Commission, and we have all sorts of, assuming we have, as many comments as we had with the septic ordinance, 130, I would do the same thing. Take all the comments, I would list them out, and I would list the responses as we had to them. And we would take those to the Planning Commission, and those would all be discussed in the open public hearing process. In between, if it went to another meeting, that meeting would be summarized, wrapped up. The Planning Commission would, if they wanted to make any changes or tweaks to any of the ordinances, it would be during that time that we would do it, send it back to the Planning Commission, and the public, everybody would still get, the ability to comment on any of the new language if anything was being recommended for change by the Planning Commission, or anyone else that would be available for discussion. In between the time, once the Planning Commission is comfortable with whatever language that it has, that's the time that I take that, wrap it up into a full report, and send it to you.
Okay.
And I would just add that this agreement, if we would pursue this kind of agreement, yes, it's integral in that discussion, but it is a separate process. And this process would be basically between me and you as the county board and the county attorney in review and such.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and my comment would be that, you know, I think that most of the discussion you're going to get, I'll just bet, I may be wrong, that you're going to get in this hearing is about how you're going to implement it, not the ordinance itself.
I think people have some input on the ordinance.
Okay, so
Dave does.
votes or not, or, okay.
That's kind of why I want to get rolling, so I can hear what people have to say.
I'm sorry, but I was going to, okay, so my question, you know, is that this, when you present this to the public, are you going to clarify that it's going to be a discussion on the ordinance and not how it's going to be implemented, or are you going to have both?
Commissioner Brochard, Madam Chair, I don't know how we can avoid having, not discussing the way in which it will be implemented, even though it is not part of the ordinance adoption process. If we recommend internally as going with a compliance monitoring company, that's got to be part of that discussion, and I don't know how it would not be part of the public hearing discussion, you know, or with the Board of Commissioners and/or with the Board of Commissioners during the whole time.
I have received some comments in regards to this. I'm also receiving comments from folks who don't live here. I'm wondering, would this be posted so they could see?
Yes,
the final
yes, Madam
draft?
Chair.
Okay.
We often, we get that concern from folks that are snowbirds or, you know, elsewhere during the winter and want to move up. They're concerned if we start having public hearings, you know, so we've even been accused that we purposely have public hearings in the winter time or time when people are gone so that we can avoid public comment, but we don't. It just happens when it happens. And yes, it is posted, it'll be put on the website, all of that. And I would say that does work because we have gotten plenty of comments and feedback in the times that we've had any ordinance changes from people not living in the area.
I got one more question, if I could. And I know that you've been talking to staff about this, because I think I've received, you know, some recommendations from a staff member. And so that is part of the process where a staff member could provide input into how this is going to be implemented.
Yes, Commissioner Bershine, Madam Chair, we have currently a staff member, Joseph Ruth, is half-time in with the stormwater and such, but he's also an enforcement officer. And so he's been very involved. We would basically designate him as somebody who would be involved in monitoring and enforcing this, regardless of whether we go with a compliance monitoring, because even if we do go with compliance monitoring, we're ultimately going to have to end up with some form of enforcement and monitoring on our own as well. And so, yeah, during the public hearing process, and I expect that staff member to be at the public hearing to be able to understand and provide input and such as well.
Thank you.
I was also curious about the section where license fees are determined by the Cook County Board of Commissioners. And I saw there were some recommendations as well in your letter. How often are they established or determined by the Board of Commissioners, or how does that process work?
It's a good question, Commissioner Mills, Madam Chair. Basically, we have, and we don't want to put a specific fee in an ordinance, because if we ever want to change that fee, then we have to go through a whole ordinance amendment process. So we just refer to the Cook County fee schedule, which can be changed from time to time. Sometimes we may have 3 public hearings in a year to change the fee. Sometimes there's 0. It just really comes on an as-needed basis. And why there isn't a specific recommendation right now coming today is because we don't have, you know, we still have to determine what it would be and how we want to implement it as to what that fee would be.
Okay.
So there's another public hearing before we decide on fees.
And then, Myron's got one too. And maybe this is getting too much in the details. I'm curious about temporary structures, yurts, they're kind of a hot thing right now. Where do they fall in zoning? And where would that then fall in the ordinance?
That is an excellent question, Commissioner Mills, and Madam Chair, if I may. I really anticipate that being part of the discussion of this public hearing. We do allow yurts as full-time residential. So
that's considered a cabin?
Of sorts, it is.
Yeah, okay.
And we have a special category for RVs, and so that's why we treat RVs a little differently. RVs, motorhomes, stuff like that are different. I know on some of those websites that you go to, they say you can rent a, VRBO in a boat, a tent, or whatever, so they really have an expansive list. We kind of narrow it down and we're governed, most of our property our area in the county is governed under the shoreland rules, DNR shoreland rules, and they have requirements with regards to, temporary structures or RVs or dwellings and guest cabins and such. And so we basically are letting the underlying zone districts accommodate for whatever purpose that is. But we do list in here that it would be it would have to be a dwelling and not like a storage shed.
Sure. Well, so the difference between a yurt and a wall tent is more or less the number of sides it has, maybe the structure too. Those, or maybe not by the shoreline zoning.
And that's where we're going to have more of that discussion during this process.
Okay,
we basically left it identified as it is, fully anticipating this discussion. We had a lot of this discussion with the septic ordinance in terms of, hey, we have a lot of remote settings. How can we accommodate people that don't want to put in a full mound system? We have abbreviated mounds. So we got special dispensation from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to modify the standards to have reduced type septic systems just to be able to accommodate our septic ordinance that we did through this exact same process.
Thank you. And I did see there was some changes from the last one that I appreciated and kind of clarified some things. So I think that's all my questions for now.
Ms. Skevelin, is that going to be recorded, that open hearing?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It will be recorded. I have to be out of town, so
yeah,
I would want to be able to listen to that also.
Commissioner Bersham, Madam Chair, we don't video record those. We audio record them. We make them digital so that there can be MP3
but I
copies.
could listen to that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Commissioner Dukirk?
Motion to set a public hearing on Wednesday, April 10th at 6 p.m. for the vacation rental ordinance.
Second.
Okay, we need to have some discussion. Commissioner?
Yeah, I had a few questions. If we set that for the 10th, then the comment period ends on the 10th?
The comment period it actually ends when the public hearing ends.
Yeah.
And so if the public hearing, if the planning commission doesn't receive comments and they're able to wrap that public comment up, that's when the official public comment period ends. If it extends the public, a month or 2 months or whatever, then people can comment that entire time. What we used to do, and what really doesn't line up with state law, is that we used to have the public hearing at the Planning Commission, and then there would be almost another mini public hearing at the Board of Commissioners. And what we ran into is people were saying, I'm not going to even bother going to the public hearing for the Planning Commission, even though that's designated by the Board of Commissioners as to where that is going to be held. I'm just going to skip over that, not waste an evening. I'm going to come right to the Board of Commissioners, and I'm going to make my comments there. Well, that disenfranchises everybody else at the public hearing who's able to provide comment and have that interchange, during that whole public hearing process. So the public comment is always open during the public hearing period. Once it's closed, then it's closed.
Yeah, because one of my concerns is with Mr. Larson is this gives you 20 business days. Is this enough time to get your clients time to comment? Yeah.
Can you address that?
Sure, I asked you a question, so I hope so.
Well, I'm just going to say thank you for all these comments. And all I wanted was, I don't want to create an ordinance. I don't know how to draft one. I just want to take a look at it for, and like Commissioner Mill said, maybe we can come in to the public hearing process with an ordinance better vetted out. I'm not an ordinance writer, I don't know how to do it, I haven't looked at it, I just thought another set of eyes on another committee would serve a better purpose, so when we get to that process, which we're not opposed to, at all, and the licensing, not opposed to it at all, just to try to have a, and maybe that's not the process, Mr. Kirk, as you pointed out. But that's really all I was looking for. With respect to your question, frankly, I don't see a lot of comments coming from our clients and our constituents.
Okay. And I do hope that it will go back to the committee, and I do apologize for any offense. I think it's important to work with the committee, but I do want to get the ball rolling as well. So I value that input, and hope I really hope we can do that before the hearing, just to, like you say, look it over. But then, yeah, when the public at large gets involved, I think there'll be a lot of tweaks and changes.
So I think that upon the recommendation and the motion of having it being posted to have a public meeting, and since it was pointed out to us that one member of the committee only found out about it on Friday, maybe other members did not know too, could this final draft be extended to them as a whole committee?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I just would like to reiterate that we did have meetings of the committee after the time frame and that. But yes, to answer your question specifically, I fully intend and had intended to, since there is twice the time that's required by the state law in terms of public notice, I had intended to send an email to the committee at a very minimum with the ordinance and with the decision of the board in terms of how to proceed.
Okay. Any other comments?
It's kind of the chicken and the egg. We can't tell the committee that there's a public hearing until the board sets the public hearing.
Right,
So
but
we
it's-
weren't intentionally excluding anyone. We were waiting for this body to make authorization in order to let the subcommittee know that this was happening. So we
Right.
do apologize if it was misunderstood.
Just a clarification on everybody's part. So we've had a motion to initiate a public hearing for the final draft of the vacation rent ordinance, setting a public hearing date at 6 p.m. on April 10th of 2019. So I will ask if everybody's ready for a vote. Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Okay. Onward and forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a, about a 7-minute break until our next
Public hearing?
public hearing.
Oh, I learned something.
You're going to be here for the government meeting. One we're having after this meeting, the government meeting.
Oh.
Yeah, okay. And then you're heading
Yeah,
off.
the housing meeting.
I had a question. Thanks, Molly. I know that Tim
That
is.
housing meeting schedule, so.
I know, I just.
And one of my sensitive issues for years and years, it seems like it's.
Yeah.
And this is part of the housing. What I think.
I've been raised in that building.
Yeah, I think the result of this, I can't tell you how many houses are removed that would otherwise be housed.
I think it's only a few, but,
Estimate, what, we estimated 400? Something like that.
I don't know.
Somewhere around there, but there's, they have a parking lot. Thank you. Just like to thank people. Yeah, thank you, I really appreciate that. That was a good question.
Bobby, Bobby.
well, I'm 57%.
Oh, well, you sure to the same.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see the different studies that they were talking about. They all came out.
Rain can mess me up bad. I still got 3 feet of snow.
How broad is the
I
spread?
did my cabin 4 feet with fire on. I took off my roof. Took me 2 days.
I got a probe rod coming just so I can start probing my roads so I can get a rough idea when I think I might be exactly the change, you know. But I made the mistake of trying too early a year or two, and that didn't help either, you know. So I did order a probe rod. I'll start probing my roads and see where I'm at.
Right.
If it all just, I look at the Arrowhead Trail, in fact, that's where they're trying to do that.
Yeah.
They're gonna have to get into
Right.
the closed trailer.
I know. And is the rain going to come in a soaker, or is it going to come? Right.
Hardly get.
Right. Yeah, so if it's slow and steady, or, yeah, who knows?
Yeah. The trailer, it's not a real trailer. I had to take a run at it.
If something does happen,
There you are.
Yeah, I don't know what's gonna happen. My track vehicle wasn't very good, nice.
I'm good, how are you?
Good, that could be
So that's really the challenge.
So you're stuck with
Just hanging out right here. This is public.
or at least this might be off a little bit.
We're up, things come slower in this.
I'd like to see that cleared off, discussions at this time. With the right questions, but some of the wrong questions. Yeah, provide the opportunity.
Hey, Mary.
He really,
I want to do more.
he's bringing everybody up.
Yes.
You're saying that, and I'm thinking, that's the kind of issue we should just have more money.
Well, that's another thing that we need to start talking about as a community. Yes, we're gonna see a lot of changes. You know, some of our big resorts are selling. People are, hey, you.
Yeah, no, that might be a good initiative to do through the chamber.
Yeah.
Here to give us.
This is Scott from COA, East Early Chair.
So, yeah, just, well, it's more a formality. They told us to pull the plug on Lutzen, so we did. And then months later, they said, well, it's a second public hearing.
So I'm gonna sure the pot during this public hearing. I know that.
The only problem with that is it being competitive. They're gonna look at that and say that it doesn't have impact, and it's not gonna score as well. So that's the big push, yeah.
But I want them to, that's what I want.
I was more thinking.
Spring might be coming.
No, I liked all of those
No, you were
words.
sitting over there looking at me going,
she's gonna get it this time. I liked all of those words. Very good.
And in the meantime.
It was because of my hour yesterday with Tim. 10 minutes.
So then it will score.
It's me frustrating.
That's right.
The ground is frozen, so you
I
can't.
always got to get out like you almost signed up. walking on that thin ice over these waters, then you can't tell whether you're 20 feet or.
I don't know, I haven't told them.
So first they have to.
I haven't.
Then they put the sod, they put the first layer of cement in there because they wanted to put the potatoes.
But yet the
in.
kids never
Then they put another layer, so I have a rim.
I used to fish down the fresh
Yeah, and it's kind of cool.
I've really learned to hate river mouths and hospitals. It's almost never helped them.
Nope. And it's nothing new either.
Hopefully not.
Pick up something.
More like a local, but you know, then there's other people who think, well, that changes. Just a strength out. Well, I know it's still changing power. As long as they don't take the snow off beforehand, you know, they're good to go.
So I don't know, you know, I
Yeah,
haven't.
well, in the soup underneath, I just shoved out like 20 acres, the apron while I'm and you can see it's kind of melting like a glaze from the bottom. Yeah,
Nobody knows about this. Right, no.
it's the pure.
Well, now,
Who would know? Hey, what's the word on Four now. Usually it's right or
that happened.
Oh, right.
Thank you.
Thank you, yeah.
What does that do?
I was loving it. And I still like it. Very close to range.
To run. These are local, these are local people.
I have to work on my mental discipline and drawing lines.
Yeah, no, I know it. I know politically.
In general.
See, that's what I always count. In the back of my head when you were running, you know, I thought, it's easy to say, well, you don't deserve that, you know. Oh, there is, yeah. Yeah, well.
That was a really good discussion. Thank you for facilitating that.
Oh, sure, yeah, you're welcome.
That was one of the things I was, and maybe I still will bring up in concerns, just having more of us give more back and forth, you know, because a lot of times I don't know where people are coming from, or, you know, just all the thought process.
We can all feed off each other.
Yeah.
Get things out on the table.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I appreciate that.
He would have brought him, he would have brought something with.
Public hearing
Very
time?
simple, I
Yeah.
think.
Okay, we're going to reconvene.
Unless Bobby moved the clock ahead a little bit to get out earlier.
Oh, he gave us, I think, an extra minute. So at this time, we're going to have a public meeting about AEOA, and we have the presenter here. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, I'm Scott Zahorik. I'm the Assistant Executive Director and Housing Director at AEOA. And what I'm here for is we had a deed, Department of Employment and Economic Development. They call them SCDP grants. They're Small Cities Development Grants. And we had a project funded a couple of years ago for the community of Lutsen. And it was to rehabilitate 8 single-family owner-occupied homes. Originally, we had letters of interest, thought 8 was not going to be an issue. It ended up that there were only 2 homes rehabilitated in Lutsen. There was, after all of the marketing we did and the pre-applications and mailings and everything else, that there were just not folks interested in the project. So there was 2 homes completed. It was about $57,000 of the almost $227,000 grant that were expended. And Deed requested, with the lack of activity, that we close the program down a year early, which is what we did. And then months later, they said that we needed to have a second public hearing in case there was any input from folks in the community, in the county, things like that. And usually, you know, they have a requirement that there be a second public hearing after the grant to get input on it. So that's what we're here for today. And that's kind of the status of the application. So, you know, as we look forward to these types of grants in Cook County, then too, we're going to have a discussion after this meeting about a potential next grant in Cooch County and kind of brainstorm a little bit about how, you know, there might be a little better impact, a little better use of the funds this time. There's been a lot of talk about county-wide applications. And since the entire population of Cook County is a little over 5,000, Deed has a restriction that communities, or that if there's an area where the population is over 1,000 people, that you need to have a target area. One of their big things is impact, and they want to see a certain location, a certain segment of the county or a city or something like that, where I think what their vision is that they drive through and they see all sorts of rehabilitated homes in a small condensed area. Well, we've had a lot of talk about that in Cook County and how that just doesn't rank like it does some in the areas of the state. So we're going to do some lobbying in the meantime for it, but we've had conversations about maybe just doing a project in Grand Marais and then continuing to lobby the folks down at Deed to have a little maybe broader look at things, or as I was just told a few minutes ago about the one-size-fits-all approach doesn't necessarily work in Cook County, and see if we can kind of get them to expand their horizons a little bit too, and maybe we do more multi-community applications. But right now they're pretty firm on this impact thing, and that's kind of what's leading us towards this Grand Marais conversation then too, because even Grand Marais, with the population of about 1,350, is still over that 1,000 target area too. So even if we were to do City of Grand Marais, we'd kind of have to lock in on an area or exclude an area. But we can do that with things like surveys, where we'll send out a mailing to everybody and then kind of target the surveys and things too. But I don't want to get too far off course on that. We're really here to talk about Lutsen and see if there's any input.
Well, thank you. The input I would have from experiencing some folks who lived out of the targeted area, and they did not realize that they were not part of a small city, so it was very disappointing for them. And that probably affects a lot of folks in the rural area then.
It does, and that's the downside of these target areas, because no matter where that line is drawn, it seems like inevitably there's somebody across the street or a block down the road that's eligible and interested, and they're outside the lines. The problem is when these projects are awarded, whatever that targeted area is, there has to be an environmental clearance done on the project. The federal regulations, just like, you know, some more bigger commercial projects and things like that. So that particular area is what's cleared and okayed to spend these use of funds. And somebody that's right across the street, that part wasn't done, so they won't let you expand target areas or pick up those people that are just outside, because you'd have to redo that entire environmental clearance again. So there's just some things with logistics and how these things work out that, you know, I mean, if we could clear the whole county or something like that then too, you know, if we can sway their opinion a little bit on how they do business, I think it could be a little more effective for folks in Cook County, because we did have a couple of folks that were not happy campers to learn that they were not eligible.
Right, right.
And I don't blame them. You know, it's tough to hear no.
Right. Comments or questions?
Point of order, Madam Chair. Are we not supposed to have the public hearing first before we discuss?
Oh, I don't know.
You can go ahead and invite public comment whenever you wish.
Okay.
Usually we ask the public first at a public hearing, so I was just making
Okay.
sure we were in order.
Thank you. Any comments from anybody?
Thanks, Scott. Mary Somnus, again, I agree with whether Scott made this recommendation or it's the consideration on the table to go ahead and close out this grant. And although the purpose of this hearing is to talk about the current grant, I do want to encourage us to work together to find the right path forward. We could do an application right now for a project in Grand Marais, but I'd also be interested in knowing, because I don't, and I'll maybe get this from Scott later, the history of how we've used this program. So is Grand Marais the right community for us to look at, or is it Grand Portage? Is there a need in Grand Portage for a lot of people to have new windows and insulation and fix their house, the envelope of their home? So I want to have a thoughtful process with some input from somebody, and I don't know whoever that is, whether it's the commissioners or anyone watching this on TV right now. It's an opportunity for people to get some funds to help them fix their house, to make it more energy efficient, to keep the wind outside. So if we hear from a community or a location where there's a lot of need and a lot of interest, because it doesn't give the people all the money that they need, but it helps. So I want us to be thoughtful about going forward. And then, as Scott just mentioned, I really do want us to work together along with our state elected officials to have agencies like this one consider that one size does not fit all, and this program wants to be restricted to a neighborhood. Well, a neighborhood, Cook County is a neighborhood. With 1,300 people even in the city, that is like a neighborhood in a metro suburb. So we want to work together on rulemaking around this program going forward. But in the short term, I support that we should close this current grant.
Thank you. Any other comments?
One other thing I'd mention too, while we're here, is looking forward to these applications too. This isn't just a housing program. There are other things that can be done. Commercial rehabilitation. We've got a project going in Silver Bay right now to do 15 homes and 7 commercial properties. So with the residential side of it right now, the homeowners need to come, 70% of the money can be deed funds, 30% they need to come up with, which we do through a variety of programs. And, in some cases, if folks don't qualify for the other programs, there could be some out of pocket. But on the commercial side of it, it's kind of a storefront program, and businesses can get up to $39,000. And in most of those cases, like in Silver Bay, 60% of the funding is a grant, 20% of it's a 3% loan from deed, and then 20% they need to come up with through other programs or on their own too. And we did do a project probably 6 years ago here in Grand Marais for Grand Marais Apartments. So there is also a rental component where, building owners can get, funding for the same types of projects to improve their rental units too. So when you're thinking about projects or where this might fit, I just want to make sure that, that everybody's aware of what can happen, so that as you think about projects and we put something together for a future application, we consider all of the facets of the program.
Very good. Okay, comments here.
How can we best address future projects?
Well, I think now while we need to nudge deed a little bit on how they look at impact, or maybe how they look at it in smaller counties and things like that, I was more thinking that since The preliminary proposals will be due this September. We need to start talking to DEED now about projects and what we might be moving forward. And that's where they're kind of stuck on this impact. That's more what got me thinking about Grand Marais. The last project done in Grand Marais was that Grand Marais Apartments. There was a little bit of a commercial component with it then too. But I was thinking that while they're looking favorably at those projects, it might be the smarter move for us to now do Grand Marais and then work on our lobbying efforts and do something out in the greater county or band together some of the smaller communities or whatever it takes to get that little further reach out into the county. We do have housing programs now through Minnesota Housing that can work on homes out in rural Cook County. The trouble is the income guidelines are so low that not a lot of people qualify. And when I say they're low, they're low. A single household, if I'm in a home by myself in Cook County, I can't make more than $20,000. Well, you all know that that's pretty tough to live on in Cook County year round. You know, so there are some things that can help, but this program with its higher income guidelines is a better fit if we can win that argument with DEED and get some projects funded that go a little more broadly than what they typically fund.
Thank you.
Commissioner Dukert?
It's not often that we hear we're too big. Usually we hear we're not big enough to get the funding, so that was a very strange comment. And I do know there's programs working in Grand Portage, because my husband is a contractor, and he's, I think it's Department of Ag that's helped out some of your residents. And he's done some programs for assistance with roofs and windows and things like that. So there's, you know, like Mary said earlier, we need to get all the people together and find out what we're all doing.
Exactly. Everybody's holding a piece of the puzzle and we need to put them together.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and Mary did this morning suggest she was going to try to get a housing summit together. So with the September deadline, or looking forward to that, Mary, we should be able to get together and all work together on some kind of a project, and also let our senator and representative know. Yeah. Yeah. Any other comments, questions? No? Okay.
I'll make a motion that we close the Lutsen
Support.
project.
Any other final comments or questions? Okay, the motion is to close the Lutsen part of the deed. And all in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. So there you are.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay, on to Brady.
Madam Chair, first item is the contract for Sag Lake parking lots. This typically would be a consent agenda. We've engaged Voyagers for a number of years, I think since 2010. They've done a good job, and they've asked for no increase for 2019, so it's still at $250 a week. We make a little bit of money on this, on those lots. With the expenses there, this expense, enough to cover the work on the other parking areas we have and making upgrades, et cetera. So it's a good program. The only change this year I wanted to note is the violation. I've highlighted that. So committee, the sheriff, the emergency management, et cetera, we sat and talked about it, and we're changing the notice of violation rather than actually issuing a parking ticket. So that's the basic change. It's just in the format. So with that, I would ask for questions or approval.
Okay. Questions or comments on this?
Are these parking lots to access the boundary waters?
Yeah, there's two of them on Sag Lake, one that we own and one is Forest Service that we lease. It's nearby, so that's for fishermen or canoers or even people that actually live on the other side of the lake that come over and use that. Some are seasonal, some are weekly, some are daily.
So in this, with the 1854 treaty agreement, us as Grand Portage band members that hold a treaty card, we do not pay access to it into the boundary waters. We don't pay to go into state parks within our ceded territory. I think they should be aware of that if there's a tribal plate parked there.
Yeah, I don't have any information on that. We should probably talk about that.
I have a question related to that. Does that mean that there's also tribal members wouldn't pay for parking?
No.
It doesn't mean
I
that?
wouldn't think so.
Oh, okay.
So we don't need to use the reservation system to enter the boundary waters. Right?
Okay, which is?
What these parking lots are for. So.
Okay.
They're general access parking lots. It's not just boundary waters.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the people actually use, where they can use motorboats, et cetera, so.
So I guess I'm not sure if that's good to know, because I didn't know that. But I don't know, does it affect it wouldn't affect the agreement then?
I have no, this has never been brought up to me
Okay.
before, so I got to do some studying on this.
Thank you, Commissioner DeShaw.
So I made a note on that.
Well, I'll make a motion to approve the contract with Voyager Canoe Outfitters.
Support.
Any further comments or questions? All in favor, show sign by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
The second item is a revolving loan request. John Moose is here in the back with a request, and he had brought in some of his wares. They're behind you, standing up on that piece of cardboard. Some of the rocks that he grinds and polishes. But the revolving loan fund committee unanimously recommended approval of a loan of $1,000 for purchase of a vibratory rock polisher and a grinder polisher, with collateral being the equipment he owns now, sandblaster tumbler, and jewelry stock estimated at a value of $21,000. That's some of it right there. He's gotten a couple of loans from us previously, similar size. This has allowed him to keep going. He doesn't seem to qualify for bank financing, so this is a good option for him, and it's worked well. I guess I'd ask for any questions or approval.
Questions or comments?
I'd like to make a motion if there's no discussion. Since I'm a member on the revolving loan committee, that we accept and authorize this loan to John Moose. And thank you, John, for all you do.
Support.
Any other comments or questions? All in favor on this?
Aye.
Show sign by yes. Same sign no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We're going to have a report from the administrator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two items. One is the Hoveland Works Public Facility is as an update, as we have not had an opportunity to review the bids and make a recommendation as far as which to accept. But from the report, you can see that a public bid opening was held. Backup information, you know that we bid this project last year, and all of the bids came in above the budgeted cost for the project. And then last fall, we directly negotiated through another purchasing avenue available to us for an opportunity to get this project done. And again, it came up more than what we anticipated we were going to spend on it. What I will say is, if you look at the spreadsheet that shows the available funds, as Ms. Thompson represented this morning, there's a lot of numbers on here, and it's not unconfusing. Brady and I spent a little bit of time trying to figure out where we were at in this process of managing the capital plan and what we've expended to date. So I think I might give an update on where we're at with the capital component. Remember, the capital component, the $2 million roughly, was just one portion. There was also the highway portion, which is transportation sales tax, and I'm not going to speak to that today. The courthouse roof and windows, we had a budget we show there of $297,000. We have a bid cost that we anticipated we were going to get, or we got last year and we rejected, of $325,000. Actual year-to-date expenditure on this project is $15,000, and that's related to the architectural and the contract, or the consultant fees to do this work for us, showing budget left to complete that project of $309,000. The board did approve a bid for the roof project, which will get done this spring. We are going to be bidding the windows for the courthouse again this spring. The bidding of the jail windows is largely dependent on what the board determines to do when the board moves forward with the project at the jail. If we are going to move forward with the jail project at some point in the next year or two, we likely won't do the windows independently. We would roll those into that project. So that's why that budget item of $27,000 is there, and why it doesn't carry forward, because we don't know that. Lighting upgrades is kind of an open-ended item. Community center playground, we had a budget of $200,000. We've spent $115,000, and we have $85,000 left to spend. Community center skating rink, you can see the budget and the bid and the actual year-to-date and the budget left. I think there's a payment number 3 is in process for a good portion of the balance left there, and I think we're only going to have a small retainage for restoration of the area around the construction, the construction project left to do this summer. The warming house, you remember the budget was $470,000. The bid costs were above what we wanted them to be. The actual year-to-date, the $29,000, again represents architectural and consulting fees. And the budget left of $175,000 represents a change in scope on accomplishing that project and a reallocation of monies within the capital equipment list. They are still working towards getting a warming house built for that amount of money out of this source of funds. That leaves the Hoveland Public Works facility. Originally, the budget on the building, 6,000 square foot building, was $950,000. The original bid cost was $1.26 million. The actual year-to-date, again, is architectural and other testing fees that have been paid, and the budget left is $1,171,000, and that does show that we have the capacity to deliver the projects that were listed on the capital improvement program with the funds that are available. If you look up at the very top left number, you'll see capital improvement funds budgeted were $215. The actual capital improvement funds available, because of the way things worked out in financing, was $2.054 million. There's some other adjustments to that, including some interest that we've accrued on the money that we haven't spent to this point. So that's why that number is a moving target. Money is always, numbers are always identified as a point in time, and they continue to move. So the bid tab from March 5th, we had 4 contractors bid. The low base bid and the low bid consideration of all alternates was from S&C Masonry, and we have met with the highway staff and reviewed those bids, the scope of the project, largely trying to identify alternate number 11 is the changing of the size of that building from 6,000 square feet to 4,500 square feet and going from 4 bays to 3 bays. So we are going to meet with the low bidder on Thursday and review the alternates and review other efficiencies within that program and have a recommendation for the board to take action on March 26th. Yeah.
Question, Jeff. Does this S&C's bid include the sewer system out there?
It does not.
So what's the estimated cost for that?
So that's a component, that's a conversation that I had with the highway staff yesterday. So if I run through the project budget and we show that we have 1.093 million funds available to accomplish this project, and I show the building bid with alternates, if I put in an estimate, I put in an estimate for the septic system, and the estimate on the architect's opinion of probable cost was $75,000. Having a conversation with Rick Crawford yesterday, he thinks that number is much lower. We need to get an estimate on providing a new well on that site because the existing water supply is not, does not have the capacity we need. So we have to balance the costs for the site improvements, the septic and the water and the building, and try to accomplish those all within the 1.093 million. And the recommendation that we bring to the March 26th meeting will show a balance of those pieces. I should have a much better idea by the end of the week after a meeting with, we're actually going to meeting with Rick and his subs that he's going to have work on the project. So some of the items that were brought up during the bid opening was questions about the mechanical and the heating systems and whether they were appropriate or whether they have technicians who can service those things. So I think we're going to have a really good conversation on Thursday, and the proposal that we'll bring to you on the 26th will identify all those pieces. One comment I will make is that the $125,000 deduct for removing 1,500 square feet is considerable, and it might make the project viable, but it increases the square foot cost of the project from about $190 per square foot to about $230. So if we can find other ways to save money on the project and retain the space, it would be, we'll never be able to build that space back for $124,000. Even if we leave option for that to be added later. And one of the considerations, and I'll bring it up now because a 3-bay garage accommodates the needs of that remote public works facility so long as the salt sand is not provided from that site and it's provided off-site, and that front-end loader is not needed to be stored in that building. If we do ever have to move salt sand storage back to the Hovland site, and we ever build a shelter for that or not, we'll have to take into consideration the needs of that other piece of equipment. Which is why I simply say that a $125,000 deduct on 1,500 square feet might make the project viable, but we'll never be able to build that space for $125,000 again. So anyway, we'll work those details out, and as always, if people have questions about the things that are on the agenda, we're always available to talk about those things in between. So I don't need any action on this today. I just wanted you to understand those notes and answer questions you might have.
Yes, Commissioner Miller?
Can you help me understand all the deduct alternate, all those different items, and I am curious about just the name of each item, or what is going on there. But maybe you can
I
bring
got
that
a
next
revised
time. Yeah.
bid tab with a key, and I will provide that, but I will answer the question today because I think it's worth doing that. I can share this bid tab with everybody too. Alternate number 1, delete the demolition of the existing public works and leave that for us to do later. Alternate number 2, delete all interior liner panels above 10-foot finished floor. So the current project shows for liner panels on the inside of the building all the way to the top and all the way across the ceiling. And that's a deduct for removing those above 10 feet. Alternate number 3, delete acoustical ceiling tile and light fixtures in the break room and the toilet room, and provide a different way of treating light and ceiling finish in those spaces. Alternate number 4, provide a substitute. The aluminum windows, it's a substitute on the windows and the material construction for the windows. Alternate number 5, provide a substitute bypass girts in lieu of flush girts as detailed per the metal building system. So it's the fastening of the building to the foundation. Alternate number 6, provide cost to delete the industrial curtain rack and wash bay. One of the primary elements that we're adding to this facility is to potentially eliminate that. 7, provide a cost to substitute doors, provide a smaller overhead door on one of the bays. Instead of the 16 by 16 doors, provide one smaller for a service vehicle rather than for a large piece. It's interesting that the deduct actually cost more in some cases. Alternate number 8, provide a cost to stockpile subgrade soils on site in lieu of trucking off-site, meaning we would take care of the soils that are pulled out to prepare the site for delivery, and we would take care of those later. So they'd be stockpiled on site. Number 9, provide a cost to delete the metal lockers in the toilet rooms. Number 10, provide a cost to substitute motion-activated fixtures in lieu of photocell-activated light fixtures. And number 11, to delete one of the bays at 25 by 60 feet, but leave all mechanical systems in place should the county want to add that space later. So the full bid tab with that key, I'll just email out at the end of this meeting so you have it.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Commissioner Dukert?
Myron had his hand up. Just go in order.
Okay, so I understand when you come to us on March 26th, you're going to have the option for the difference in square footage that you mentioned.
I will be bringing a recommendation of which elements we think we should accept or not accept.
Okay.
And I'll bring a copy of the bid tab and all of the options available, and ultimately then you'll either accept our recommendation or modify our recommendation.
Okay. Just so I understand, do you think that will include, you know, the increased square footage to have it at a cheaper cost for the future? Will that be an option or not? You don't know yet.
I'm hopeful that we can retain the 6,000 square feet.
Okay.
But I'm not, there's a lot of moving pieces to make that happen.
Okay.
If I can find $125,000 worth of savings elsewhere in the project, then I will.
It seems to me that Hovland's got a lot of open land, and in the future, I think we'll have more development there. Maybe not, but, and wouldn't we want to have, you know, build this out for the future? That's just a comment.
There was one comment that was made, and it's been made by members of the public, and it's been made by some of our staff. Why don't we build 3 bays and leave the existing building there? And Kristen Foster and I have reviewed that, and our recommendation to build the building is because the current building is not safe. And I wouldn't want that building to stay in service unless it was made safe. And we wouldn't be making a recommendation for a new building if we thought that making that building safe and functional was cost-effective in the long run, which is why I really believe that that building needs to be taken down. So I'll address all of those elements in what you see before you on the 26th. If you have questions in between, or still answer questions now, but
Sure.
I think there are enough efficiencies in the scope of the project related to mechanical systems and the assumptions we made related to septic and other on-site preparation that we may be able to retain that square footage.
Okay, good. I think, at least myself, I think we should look at that from my experience. You just got to build for the future.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, it just costs so much later.
Commissioner Dukert?
Right along the lines with Myron, let's remember the reason why we're looking at a law enforcement expansion is because we saved money and built it smaller. And the courthouse, we saved money and we're outgrowing it. And I hate to bring it up, Myron, but the YMCA, we saved millions and our bathroom's not big enough. And so all good intentions. We all know that quote. So I know money's tight. I know taxpayers have issues with spending money, and I have issues with spending money. But from our vast past experience, it doesn't do us any good when we make cuts like that. Thank you, Jeff, for explaining this sheet. Maybe it's my accounting background, but it was self-explanatory to me, so I'm glad that someone said during public comment that it was confusing, because wasn't to me, so thank you for making that less confusing for those that are watching.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you, Jeff, for providing this, and Commissioner Mills for bringing the attention to all these details about what the alternates need, because I don't know, I didn't know that either, so now we're all in the loop. So thank you, Jeff.
Okay. And then, Madam Chair, the next item is the Kronos payroll module purchase and implementation. And I will preface these comments, and I'm going to ask Brady to make some comments about the process we've gone through at this point before we ask you to consider this. Internally, we've had a committee that includes Judy and Becky, and Rena's been a part of that conversation, and Brady and myself for nearly 2 years. When I first came here in December of 2015, Amy Lewick retired and gave me this great big box of all of our benefits administration information and dropped it on my desk. And because we had been doing everything manually and by paper. And the board authorized the purchase of the Kronos HR component, which allowed us to map all of those processes and make them all electronic and put them all in a database. And I will tell you, it wasn't without frustration that was done. Primarily, it was the frustration was because people usually do payroll and then do HR. And when you do payroll, then you've got your database of all of your employees and all their codes and all the other stuff in there. We kind of did it backwards, but it worked. And this past year, we did online enrollment for all of our staff, and we've got the administration of benefits is all working through the HR module, and the performance review system is the next thing that's going to be rolled out through the HR module. When we were considering why are we considering doing something different, right now we have Kronos for HR, we have RT Vision for time cards, and we're using MSys, the state-supplied payroll system, for our payroll. And the three systems don't talk to each other. They can export data and files and information to one another, but there's a lot of duplication of effort in the maintenance of and there are a lot of manual calculations made every payroll period. One of Amy's comments before she left is you need to have all of your annual contracts start on the first day of the first payroll of the new year rather than on January 1st, because our systems were so cumbersome that all that calculation was all done manually and often needed to be done several times to make sure that everything was done correctly. Having an integrated system means you don't have to do that, because that's what computers do well, is they do math well if you provide them with the appropriate setup and basis and programming. What we didn't propose back then was to switch time and attendance and payroll. Essentially, at that point in time, Amy said, I will leave earlier if you propose that than she did, because we had just rolled out the RT Vision time and attendance, and the MSys system was still working. And the MSys system is still working. At the point in time, there were 7 counties who were still using that for payroll processing out of the 87. Itasca County has since left and converted over to Kronos, and now there are 6 counties left who are still using that system. That's a lot of support and upkeep. I don't know. When I look at that, I wonder how long they can continue to put efforts in to keep that up to date and continue to keep that current for the 6 small counties who are using that system. Anyway, we looked at 4 different options, and we completely took the idea of what we learned about Kronos HR and changing that to whatever else, ADP, there were a couple other companies that we studied, and we nailed it down to, eventually, the process of elimination, we got to the point that Kronos might be the only one that could actually meet our needs. Some of the unique needs are our time and attendance. The time cards that we use are very complicated. The workflows are very complicated because we have the labor contracts that we do, that we have shift differentials, that we have out-of-class work, we have call-in pay, we have all these other things that are identified, and setting up those time cards is very complicated. Payroll is relatively easy. Once you have all the formats in there, processing payroll and meeting state and federal and withholdings and withholdings related to benefits information is relatively easy. Transferring all of that data back then into our state accounting system, fund accounting system, is also can be complicated because that system is the way that it is. We got right down to making a recommendation to go with Kronos, HR, time and attendance, and payroll. The software costs were within the amount of money that we have allocated this year for the budget, but the implementation costs were outside of what we had allocated for the budget. So the numbers that you see on this page 2, the annual costs of our current HR and payroll is actually the 2018 annual costs of $33,722 for licensing for the systems that we're currently using. Brady has said that the MSIS payroll has actually come down this year, so it's a little bit less than that. We're recommending at this point that we move forward with the payroll part and that we leave the time and attendance part for 2020 for budgeting purposes and also for the purpose of putting that implementation, doing one implementation at a time and then doing the second implementation. The number in the middle that shows the $22,902 is the anticipated annual cost of using Kronos for HR and payroll and RT Vision for the time cards. The third cost at the bottom, the $20,607, is the quote from Kronos to provide HR, time and attendance, and payroll for a base of 130 employees that the county has now. 130 is, it's a number that someone's going to take a look at and go, wow, but remember we process payroll for soil and water, for court administration, for a lot of people who aren't necessarily county employees, but they get factored into this. They get factored into the people who are supported by that processing.
Can you say that again, please? The 2607.
The 20,607.
Yep.
That's the bid that we have from Kronos to provide HR, time and attendance, and payroll as one lump sum. If we split our implementation and do payroll in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And time and attendance in 2020, we would get to that rate when we are able to cancel the contracts for the other systems. One key component to this is our contract with MSIS. If we don't want to pay fees in 2020, we have to let them know by April 1st of this year. So if we want to cancel our contract for payroll in 2020, we have to provide them notice by April 1st of this year. Brady, comments about the process?
Well, this was anticipated to some degree, not completely. Didn't know all of the factors, so there's an additional $12,000 added for payroll this year in the budget. It's in Rena's budget. And so that's what you see under 2019 implementation costs. When you add up what's expected to be the monthly costs plus the one-time startup, but that's just for the payroll. That's payroll only, which is the easier function. So this was broken out because the total cost was going to be much greater. Time and attendance is the more complicated, as I understand it. And so we wouldn't have anywhere near the budget for the one-time costs this year. But if it was broken into two parts, you could do the payroll this year under what was added to the budget, and then you'd have to budget additional next year to put time and attendance into effect. So this contract is for, that you see in front of you, is just for the payroll portion of it.
And just a further clarification on Brady's comments about the implementation costs, you'll see that the one-time fees, the very bottom line says $25,000, and this implementation of payroll in 2019 represents $4,000 of one-time fees, and implementation costs for time and attendance shows $21,000 of one-time fees. $11,000 of that is the fees from Kronos to set this up for us and build the interfaces between the system and the benefits administration that we have. Just setting up the interfaces and the data communication between the systems that we have. And $10,000 is recommended by the committee who is studying this for additional on-site training to help with the implementation process. One of the key factors that slowed this process down, and rightly so, was the implementation at Itasca County was a little bit cumbersome and it had fits and starts, and they referenced significant delays, and the implementation took significantly longer than they were represented that it was going to take. So based on conversations with Kronos reps, we've identified additional on-site training. If we don't use that, we won't have to pay for that. But I think that we would use a good portion of that $10,000 in on-site training to get that done. The good news is the interfaces between payroll and IFS are being built out because Itasca is doing it. The other significant interface is the cost accounting interface between payroll and New Roads, which is the cost accounting program the highway has to report data in. And that is also being built up because Itasca has the same process that we do. So this bit of a delay, our plan was to do this this year. But last year's, April got away from us last year. There are quite a number of efficiencies in the process that will be seen above and beyond just the approximately $10,000 a year cost savings in software fees. And not that anybody's going to get that back, but that means that Brady's staff is going to have more time to do the other things that are on their tasks, on their desks, rather than just processing payroll. And Judy's going to have more time to work on things like staff engagement and staff development rather than just processing benefits. So a lot of the manual administration, and it absolutely continues to still boggle my mind that Amy did all of this by herself.
And this wasn't the only thing she was doing.
And this was absolutely not the only thing that she was doing. But to that extent, what Amy was doing was just processing stuff as efficiently as she could because she'd been doing it for a long time. And we didn't have the things that we have now, like having a benefits committee that's actively reviewing and staff development and engagement meetings where we're actually talking about how staff get more involved. So we do have more capacity than we did. This will just streamline these processes and eliminate a lot of the potential for error that we have in payroll processing.
Well, as we know, technology moves us along, and we have to look at efficiency. The actual training, on-site training, meaning they'll do on-site with a person coming to train, or do the on-site through a computer program?
No, the on-site training would be part of the time and attendance, would be part of the 2020 proposal. The payroll processing, literally the discovery documentation for payroll processing is maybe 4 to 6 hours worth of reporting time out of our current system. Payroll is a very standard system. You meet state and federal guidelines. Kronos has been doing payroll since computers were developed. They are one of the industry standards in payroll. Specifically, the question about on-site training, which wouldn't be until the implementation of the time and attendance and in 2020, yes, would actually be having somebody on-site. Yes. We do have the option, and with the HR software, we did do video conferencing and half-day training through that, and we do have the opportunity to do that, and we had good luck with that process in finally getting through and implementing the HR system. So that is an option, and it is less expensive on a daily basis, and then, of course, you don't have any travel fees.
Did the reviewing committee have many sources to review for this, besides Kronos?
We considered.
Are there other options out there?
Yeah, we considered four alternatives. Was it 4 alternatives, including the current system, or was it 4 others?
ADP, Paycheck, I can't remember this.
There were actually 4 other systems in consideration rather than ours. And basically, we went through a process where we narrowed it. It was kind of like a basketball bracket. We went from 4 to 2 and 2 to 1, and then we started talking about what the implementation would look like and how that would impact. One of the reasons we didn't do it last year is Brady just represented that his office didn't have the capacity to do a conversion in an election year.
And we don't really know, but just based on other counties' experience, bigger counties that took anywhere from 9 months to a year to accomplish it. One that did both payroll and HR. And I said, well, we've already got HR. And they said, well, payroll is the biggest part. That you still figure 9 months to get that into effect. So this might be a better method anyway. It's driven by the cost, the fact that it's not budgeted this year, but to be able to put in payroll first might be a better method, especially for a small county. This is a big change. Talking to Rena still here, this kind of software change is a big change, so you want to be careful about it. And Molly has to review the contract. I don't think she's had a chance to yet, but just want to make sure this one doesn't tie us into the second contract either.
Mm-hmm.
So
there is
the time and attendance, which is meant for the following year.
So just to clarify, if we approve this, what we're going to do is we're going to ask Brady to send notice to MSIS canceling payroll for 2020 for Cook County and plan to implement payroll through Kronos. I think we would probably start in June or July and have this available and running before the end of the year so we can run concurrently and have confidence in that. But we would still be using the RT Vision time and attendance to capture time card data. And we would still have the inefficiencies between that communication. You're still communicating data from one system to another. But we have Kronos. When I asked him for alternatives, when I talked about our budget crunch, I said, can we push some of this stuff really close to the end of the year so we pay for it in 2020? And he says, you don't want to push this project up against a deadline like that and have to be running payroll on January 1st. And he said, and that's just kind of an accounting issue, and that's not the reason you would do this. He suggested that we do this in 2 steps. And I asked specifically, are there redundancies? Are there duplication of effort? And he said he really didn't see that there's a duplication of effort in this, that this does make sense. This implementation is something they have done in other places. And we still have the option to not move forward with the time and attendance if we're satisfied with this. But there are additional efficiencies that we get from that and a marginal additional cost benefit by switching.
Commissioner Joe?
So you're looking for approval of this first box, Jeff?
There are actually 3 contracts from Kronos. There are 2 payroll contracts, and then there is a change in our billing structure from annually ahead of time to monthly in arrears. So there are actually 3 different pieces, 3 contracts that would.
That first box there, correct?
Yes, yes. I'm sorry. On that summary,
That's
yes.
what I was
We're looking at that. We're looking at that summary of the implementation.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. And that's represented by the following 3 contracts that are behind that summary sheet. Yes. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Hill?
So the annual savings, once everything is rocking and rolling, is just over 10 grand, is that right? But there's some one-time fees?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep. I anticipate $25,000 of implementation costs split over 2 years, and a savings of, again, Brady said the 2019 licensing with MSIS is less than it is in 18, and he thought it was somewhere in the $16,000 annual range instead of the $18,000 annual range. So I would represent the cost savings could be about $10,000 a year.
And that's just straight up dollars, not
That's
talking
software.
about efficiencies.
Yes,
and-
that's
yeah,
just
is that-
software
yep,
costs.
Yep.
So Commissioner DeShaw, the recommendation then is to approve the purchase of the payroll system as presented? Is that how you interpret it?
And cancel MCIS payroll.
And cancel, yeah. Okay, so are we ready for a motion?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Any other questions or comments?
Madam Chair, if the motion that you make could please include conditioning your approval on the county attorney's review of the contract, then I will contact you after I've reviewed it and approved it, and that will certainly happen by the 22nd, which is a week from next Friday.
I will amend my motion to include county attorney review. Dave, do you support that amendment?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Okay. We've had an amendment to purchasing the payroll system, canceling the MCIS payroll system with the attorney review at the end. Okay, any other comments or questions? So I'll ask for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Thank you on all of that, Jeff.
Thank you.
Do we have any commissioner reports? I would just comment that the other day I met with board member from Boreal, and he gave me a lot of great information, and this is mainly for our information and the public. They are doing a great job in doing a lot of updating on the Boreal site, and they are making more connections with WTIP and the county and especially emergency management. So when we all have time, let's connect with Boreal and see what they're doing. Their director, Lisa Bauer, is open for comments or suggestions about improving the site. And they're doing great things in the public. They have a tech night in 3 or 4 different areas. They have a little children's program on how to build a website, and so they're really moving forward. And I just wanted to say, last year, do you remember you got this in the mail? He just reminded me that, yes, we got this in the mail, and especially for emergency preparedness portal. So thank Valerie for working with them and moving forward with a lot of good information on that site also. Meetings to note.
I'm going to NERC on Friday.
Okay. I will be attending the 3 township annual meetings tonight, so I'll be going to Lucin, Tofty, and Shorter. I call it my marathon night. And I give a report, I give some meeting updates, and then just ask if they have any questions about anything. Any other meetings to note? Commissioner?
Meeting updates. I did do the One Watershed. Thank you, Myron, for sharing that committee with me, and we'll be meeting again in May, because there's now that we have the plan, we're going to move forward and hopefully have funding and projects and fun things to do, so it's a lot to absorb and
Thanks for doing that.
battle out who gets what, but we have an incredibly wonderful relationship with Lake County, so I am looking forward to this process, and I think great things are going to come along.
I could just comment, last time we got all the money, so, for the highway project, so.
Or
you
Chair
have to give a
Spay
little
knows
bit.
all about my "we want it all up here" attitude.
You might have to give a little bit.
Yep, might have to give a little.
Any other meeting updates? Otherwise, we will move on to our wonderful March anniversaries. Commissioner Dukert, take it away.
All righty. Jonathan Bauman, only 4 years, but thank you. Always has a smile when you see him. Everybody wave at our deputies when they go by. They appreciate it. Courtney, thank you. You've hit a milestone here, 25 years. Warren Hagan, many of you know as Festus in our highway department, hit lucky number 13. Judy Hill in administration, 3 years. Bill Lane in land services, again lucky number 13. Teresa Oberg in our soil and water, 9 years, and we did at the soil and water meeting. Give her a little pat on the back for that. Randy Roberts, 1 year at the highway department. Rena back there, 5 years you've been with us. Thank you so much. Kim Shepard up in court administration, 22 years. And Don Wagner, 2 years. Thank you all so much for what you do for us as commissioners, for each other as staff, and for the community. It is appreciated.
Oh, I guess I have one more. Maybe we can share on our joint highway engineer meeting we had 2 weeks ago. I think that went fairly well. It was me and Myron and Jeff and.
Just to provide an update, thank you, Commissioner DeShaw, that we are meeting quarterly with Commissioner Bershheim and DeShaw and 2 commissioners from Lake County and Matt Huddleston, their administrator, in managing the shared services agreement for highway engineer. And we're at the point where that agreement runs out the end of this year, December 31st of this year. So we, Matt and I will probably be looking at drafting an extension to that agreement. We're welcoming feedback from the commissioners who are involved in that, and commissioner feedback or any feedback that you have related to that. But based on the conversation that we had at that meeting, I think that our goal is to renegotiate an extension of that contract. So barring any discussion to any other relationship, I would really be looking for adjustments to how that's working or how that isn't working. And our primary obligation to make that work is still to find that 4th person in the engineering department, whether it be another technician or a supervisor, and that vacancy is posted and ongoing. So I would hope that we would be able to fill that position.
Commissioner Dukert? He had his hand up first.
Yeah, I think just to comment on that, that's pretty important that we have that. And we've talked about it for a year, and it's still not there. And so I guess I'm just saying this to the public that you know, these things become important when we can't get people, when we have to start thinking about what we can do in order to get them. Otherwise, we're going to have consequences of it that could be far more, you know, impactful and significant and almost terrible. So, you know, I would encourage you to do whatever you can to make that work. And if we have to change something, then I would ask that you bring that before the board, if that's what it takes to do it. And thanks for all you're doing on that, too. I'm sorry. Okay.
That's all right. Along the same lines as Myron and kind of on public comment this morning, we had a former commissioner make comments about our administrative government, and I think that it's kind of sad that those comments are made after she's no longer in office, and I think we forget to thank our administrator for what he's doing and the conversations. I believe you're both quite capable of having a highway engineer conversation with Lake County, but I believe that having the administrative government along with their administrative government in these conversations makes it easier. Coming from my experience of not having an administrator here, and we had a bunch of silos, and each commissioner was given a group of departments and trying to get that to work. I don't know how we would do this without the type of government we have now, and the commissioners that we have, and the work that you put in, and the travel that you put in. And so I just wanted to say it before I'm not a commissioner. I don't want to have to come into public comment and make those comments and make those statements, because it's important that we always acknowledge the work that we're all doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have one more comment too, just kind of along those lines. It's how long have you been here, Jeff? 3 years?
4 years.
4 years. And so the administrative position is, and I know Jay was here before you, but the administrative position is still fairly new for us as a community, and change can be hard, and I guess just adjusting to how things work and having expertise. I don't know how long it'll take, but I just want to, I really want to emphasize my support for Jeff in his role and really want to do all we can to support him and make sure he's got what he needs to do his work. And I've just been hearing more talk around that, and so I wanted to make that point.
We have a large toolbox, and in our toolbox, we have a lot of things that we need to have. And that is all working together, from the administrator, Molly, who's on our team, and everybody. So thanks for your comments. Anything else before we adjourn? So motion to adjourn then.
So moved.
All in favor? Second? You second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.